I think we should start, sir.
Yeah, just wait a minute.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. This is
Good.
116th Sunday Sahityak Satsang, and this event is being streamed live on YouTube. Also, the link for certificate will be posted at the end of the event. And on this occasion, I would like to invite Mrs. Shweta Su, the event coordinator of this month, to welcome the invitees and introduce the Master of Ceremonies. Please, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. I am Shweta Sur, and I take the privilege to welcome you all at the iSPELL's 116th Sunday Sahityak Satsang on the topic The Comparative World of Bhakti in Early Modern India. And our speaker for today is Dr. Dhurjjati Sarma, Assistant Professor, Department of Modern Indian Languages and Literary Studies, Guwahati University. Indigenous Society for the Promotion of English Language and Literature is devoted to facilitate and elevate. It is a people's platform where academicians impart expertise benefiting the members associated with the society for the sake of promoting English language and literature. Now, I would like to introduce our Master of Ceremonies. Sangamitra Laisram Konsam is a subject teacher in English at Government Boys HS School, Haflong. She had completed her master's from Cotton College and is trained as a master trainer for elementary teachers under British Council and SSA. She had hosted several district level academic cultural programs at Dima Hasao district. She had started writing at a very tender age, and many of her poems, articles have been published in reputed anthologies and journals. Madam, I would like to request you to take over the program and proceed.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much. Ma'am, am I audible and visible too?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible and visible.
Okay, thank you so much. Once again, a very good afternoon to all the esteemed participants here today. It is once again the 116th Sunday Sahityak Satsang of Indigenous Society for the Promotion of English Literature, Language and Literature. Well, I believe with all the propitious events that iSPELL organizes, it surely justifies its motto, facilitate to elevate. And thank you once again, Madam Shweta Sur, for those gratifying words of welcome. Well, I am indeed delighted to share the space as the Master of Ceremonies today in today's event. I do take the privilege to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Dhurjjati Sharma, and Chairperson Dr. Prashanta Chakrabarti in today's event on the topic, The Comparative World of Bhakti in Early Modern India. To introduce our keynote speaker, I'm very glad to do so. Dr. Dhurjjati Sharma, the keynote speaker of today's event, is an assistant professor in the Department of Modern Indian Languages and Literary Studies in Guwahati University, Assam. He worked as a production editor at Sage Publications, New Delhi. His writings have been published under Sahitya Academy, Routledge, Palgrave Macmillan Publications, and in journals like Rupkatha Journal, Dibrugarh University Journal of English Studies, Space and Literature India, and Margins, a journal of literature and culture. Dr. Sharma is presently studying the early and modern literature of Assamese, Bengali, Hindi, and Urdu from a comparative cultural perspective. He had been a research fellow in Northeast India Studies at the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts in New Delhi. Having studied comparative literature, he is focused on developing new insights and perspectives on the composite area of comparative literary history, particularly on a critical history of Assamese literature at present. We are extremely glad to have you here with us, sir, today. And I take the honor to request Dr. Dhurjjati Sharma to take over the session. Sir, please.
Right. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Shanghamitra ji and Shweta ji, for the very generous introduction and very warm welcome accorded on the occasion. So it's my pleasure to be invited as a speaker on this program, Facilitate to Elevate, organized by the Indigenous Society for the Promotion of English Language and Literature, iSPELL. So, so I guess I can start the discussion today. So since this is a Sahityik Satsang, so this shouldn't be just a lecture per se, but I envision this to be a kind of a dialogue, a kind of a discussion. And therefore, I haven't prepared anything in written format because I feel that in satsang, you should actually be speaking your mind and speaking from your heart, and what you feel about the particular subject that you have chosen to talk about. So the topic that I've chosen for a discussion today is the comparative world of Bhakti in early modern India. So before starting on the discussion, I'd just like to talk about the important words, the keywords of my title. So there are three important keywords in my title: comparative, Bhakti, and early modern India. And I'd just like to clarify what I mean by these particular terms. So I'll begin with Bhakti. So when I'm talking about Bhakti, when we talk about Bhakti in a literal sense, it basically means devotion, worship, or rather devotionalism. And when I'm referring to Bhakti, I'm actually referring to the Bhakti movement, and that signified, that constituted an important period in the history, Indian history, from for almost 1,000 years. If we start from the 8th, 9th century in Tamil Nadu to about 18th to 19th century. So it covered almost 1,000 years of Indian history. So I see a Bhakti movement not merely as a devotional movement, or rather a movement that focused on, sectarian modes of worship, worshiping Vishnu or Shiva or Shakti and other gods and goddesses. But it's a movement which also had a very highly secular and radical elements associated with, its propagation or its sustenance across the length and breadth of the Indian geography for almost like a millennium. So when I'm talking about Bhakti movement, I'm talking about the influence, I'm talking about the replication which followed various stages of the movement upon language, literature, and culture of India. So this is what I understand in broad terms as Bhakti. Now coming to the next phrase, next term per se, that is early modern India. So early modern India is basically a period which is traditionally referred to by historians as a medieval period. Now we must understand that when we are talking about literary history, when we try to divide, when you talk about different periods of Indian history, we generally use the terms ancient, medieval, and modern. And most of us who have studied historiography, we know that these are basically models which were propounded during the colonial era as part of the larger colonial epistemology. So ancient basically refers to the Sanskrit age. The medieval period basically refers to the Persian period, and with modernity is generally, or modernism, generally associated with the coming of the British or the Western influence in the 19th century. So when I'm talking about early modern India, I'm basically trying to push back the idea of modernity, not to about 3 to 4 centuries back, and I am arguing vis-a-vis Bhakti that what we understand as modernity within the colonial context or vis-a-vis the colonial epistemology, that needs to be revised in the light of the fact that Bhakti movement actually signified India's first brush with modernity. because that movement, when I'm talking about the radical and the secular elements associated with Bhakti, the movement actually had a wide ranging, the movement actually had a very deep impact on the societal structure, the social, political, economic, ideological, literary, cultural. It touched every aspect of the Indian society. So we have strong reasons to argue that modernity, or so that modernity within the Indian context actually began much before the colonial intervention. So this is and what happened with what came up with colonialism could be defined as colonial modernity, but we have had many indigenous instances of modernity, indigenous indigenous cultures of modernity, which happened much before the coming or the onset of colonialism in Indian history. So this is what I understand when I'm using the term early modern India. And now when I'm using the word comparative basically, I teach comparative Indian literature at Guwahati University. So my approach is primarily comparative. So when I'm talking about comparative, I'm trying to understand comparative as not merely putting two texts together and trying to explore similarities or dissimilarities, but comparative, I'm envisioning this particular concept as to do with how cultures of influence and reception have interacted with one another. So the two key terms associated with comparison is basically influence and influence and reception. Last week, Dr. Shiv Shankar Majumdar, I think he spoke last week. He talked about the influence on Shakespeare on Assamese literature. So there obviously we talked about how Shakespearean plays, or rather the larger Shakespearean ethos, how it impacted upon the Assamese, or rather the Indian cultures, Indian literary cultures in the wake of modernity. But we must understand this fact that influence is not merely one-sided, and influence is not that the recipient cultures are not merely passive recipients of influence from a master culture. Even, yes, we may be at the receiving end, but we actively process, reprocess, fashion, refashion the influence, the impact that is coming towards us. Right. So I understand comparative primarily as a process of interaction, a process which we can also term as an interliterary process, a process through which cultures interact. They have a dialogue, and this dialogue is an ongoing dialogue of equal stature. Right. So when I'm understanding comparative, this is how I'm trying to conceptualize. Now, having defined the three terms, key terms in my title, I would now go into the main part of my lecture. And when I talk, and here I would like to begin with the very idea of influence and reception that I talked about. See, when we talk about Indian literary cultures, when we have to understand two important concepts introduced by, not the concepts were already there, but they have been theorized by a prominent Sanskritist and literary historian called Sheldon Pollock. He has two terms called the cosmopolitan and the vernacular. Now, these two terms, by these two terms, is basically referring to the fact that when we talk about cosmopolitan, we are actually referring to the Sanskrit culture, because we all know that when we are talking about different Indian languages, different vernacular literary cultures of India, we have all derived various elements, linguistic, social, linguistic, literary, cultural, many elements from the cosmopolitan Sanskrit culture. Now, so we, first of all, we need to understand what exactly was this cosmopolitan Sanskrit culture. So this cosmopolitanism was a culture of a huge geographical cultural expanse, which extended from, say, present-day Kandahar in Afghanistan to Southeast Asia. So this was the larger geographical expanse where Sanskrit operated as a cosmopolitan language. For example, in the present context, we talked about English being a cosmopolitan language, because if we presently look into the outreach of English, it covers virtually the entire world. So Sanskrit actually had this position in around the first millennium and the first millennium CE, and the early first few years, first few like the early centuries of the second millennium. So Sanskrit was not the mother tongue of any specific community, but it was the primary language or the lingua franca of communication among the kingdoms and dynasties which ruled from this particular expanse, from say Afghanistan to Laos or Cambodia. Now, what existed parallelly with Sanskrit were different vernacular literary cultures. We can talk about Assamese, we can talk about Marathi, we can talk about Bengali. They developed from Sanskrit. Obviously, there was the Apabhrangsha stage, there was the Prakrit stage. I'm not going into that, but these vernacular literary cultures, they began to have their own existence, a tangible existence, from about say the 14th century, from about the third. I'm not going into the South Indian languages here. I'm primarily talking about the North Indian languages. They have a tangible presence in the Indian linguistic literary map from about the 13th or the 14th century. If we take a kind of a average, a sort of a standard starting point. Now, what Pollock wants to emphasize is that how these vernacular literary cultures, when they acquired these different elements from the larger cosmopolitan culture, they actively reprocessed those elements in the light of their own sensibilities. Here we might take the example of different Ramayanas, different Ramkathas, which came to be composed in different Indian languages from about the 14th century. In the first half of the 14th century, we come across the first vernacular Ramayana composed in the North Indian language, and that Ramayana was the Assamese Ramayana. It is the first vernacular Ramayana to be composed in an Indo-Aryan language. And this was the Ramayana by Madhav Kandoli, and it is referred to as the Hoptokanda Ramayana. Now, here in Kandoli's case, the very interaction between the cosmopolitan and the vernacular becomes very apparent. Now, let us examine this scenario. Now, the story goes like this, that Madhav Kandoli was instructed by his patron king. He's the Kachari king. Someone refers to him also as the king from Tripura side, King Mahamanikya. He was instructed by the king to compose the Ramayana in a language that everyone understands, right? To make it accessible, because obviously Ramayana was composed in Sanskrit. So he wanted the Ramayana to be the story of Rama to be made accessible to everyone in his kingdom. Now here Madhav Kandoli, obviously obviously Kandoli translated the Ramayana under the patronage of the king. Now here Kandoli was faced with a very crucial epistemological question. Now he was a Brahmin scholar. He could read Sanskrit, obviously, and then he also knew Assamese. Now, when he was translating the story of Ram, first of all, he needs to make sure that he is not violating or he is not doing anything that would diminish the propriety of the quote-unquote original narrative.
Right, sir, right.
He has to be very sure that he is not going against, the tale that is inscribed in the larger cosmopolitan ethos. But at the same time, he has to refashion the story so that everyone understands. He cannot sort of put in jargons, or he cannot be putting in. He needs to bring the storyline to the level of the people of the kingdom, where the people were mostly they belong to, maybe a tribal peasant culture. So how to make the Rama story accessible to their understanding? So he expressly writes in the course of his Ramayana that this Ramayana, he says in Assamese that Doibobani nahi to lokiko hai kotha. This is not a divine commandment. Doibobani. This is not something that has been issued, as a god, the tale of God, but lokik hai kotha. The Loki is something the people's story, the story of the people. But having said that, at the same time, he says that, I have not done anything which will infuriate the Pandits. That he in fact challenges the scholars, the Pandits, to go through my text, because obviously we all understand that translation was not seen as an activity, as an acceptable activity in the early modern period. We know how, we know the story why the early translators of Bible, they were killed, they were burnt at stake for having translated the Bible. So translation was seen as something that infringes. It was an act which was seen as sacrilegious to the authority of God. How can you possibly, kind of translate, or how can you possibly, try to emulate the words of the God in your own language, right? So Madhav Kandali had to be very careful while doing, and he challenges the scholars that, look into my text, and if you find anything amiss, if you find anything that I have done which will sort of violate the propriety of the original, then you tell me. So here, very tactfully, he had to negotiate the balance between, because he occupied, if we try to understand, if we try to see the cosmopolitan and vernacular as a spectrum, he occupied a very tight middle position. He straddled both the domains. So when we are, so obviously there are many more instances. We can also talk about Tulsidas. We can also talk about Kritibas. And if we go back to our vernacular Ramayanas in our mother tongues, we shall all understand the problem, the challenges that these poets had to confront, because they were somebody who straddled both these domains, and they knew the dangers which are waiting to pounce upon them if they, try to incline too much on one side or the other. So this is something that we need to keep in mind when we are it's not just about pure diversion, but it was also a highly political, ideological act of translation that happened in the early modern period. So this is what Pollock said. Now from Pollock, I would just like to talk about another theoretician called Christian Lee Nowitzki. Now, when Pollock talked about the dynamics between the cosmopolitan and vernacular, he, on most of the occasions, he confined himself to the, to the location at the court. He basically looked at the dynamics of patronage, and we knew that most of these translations, because at that time there was no printing press, so most of these translations, most of these adaptations, retellings rather, I should use the word retellings, because these were not translation as we understand in the present parlance. They were primarily the students where the stories were retold and refashioned. So these retellings were mostly commissioned from the royal court. But Nowitzki, he mainly works with the Marathi saints. He brings to our notice another aspect of this process of vernacularization. He refers to this process of vernacularization. Vernacularization basically means how elements from the cosmopolitan Sanskrit culture were appropriated and reappropriated into the vernacular literary cultures of this language. Now, when he talks about vernacularization, he talks about the processes through which how different locales, not merely the court, but also the temples, the monasteries, right? And even he refers to the spaces as quotidian spaces, right? So, but a court is not a quotidian space. A court is a highly specialized, highly well demarcated space within a particular kingdom. But when Nowitzki talks about quotidian spaces, quotidian, he's talking about normal, ordinary workaday spaces where everyone can come and interact. He talks about different publics where these are spaces where the elite and the non-elite, they meet, they converge, they discuss. So what Novetske does, he brings the whole element of vernicularization from the court to the open space. This is where the literary activities happened mostly. Now, since I don't have much time, I'll quickly move to the third aspect. I'm just laying out these aspects, so maybe we can have a discussion on this. So when I talked about Bhakti. So the third thing that I would like to talk about is the idea of multimediality. And multimediality is a concept that is closely connected to comparative methodology. Now here, I would like to refer to my teacher, Professor T.S. Setanath, when he talks about three important modes of representation. Three important modes of representation, and this is actually where comparative research originates. And this particular methodology is intimately connected to the way we should be looking at the cultures of Bhakti in early modern India. So he talks about three modes of representation. One is scriptocentric, one is phonocentric, and one is body-centric. Now, what are these three important concepts? Now, let us take an example. I would like to take the example of, say, Tulsidas. Now, when we talk about say, Ramcharitmanas, now Ramcharitmanas is an important text within North Indian Bhakti cultures. Now, when you talk about Ramcharitmanas, there's a particular text which is also worshipped. We must understand, just like the Bible, for example. The Bible is something that is not only read, but that is a text which is also revered. Just like even the Bhagavad Gita, that is a text that has a sacred existence of its own. We revere the text as an object, right? It actually externalizes our devotion. So Ramcharitmanas also has that stature within the North Indian and also literary cultures outside India. So the very text, the very idea of text in the traditional sense, it is a scriptocentric, the very words on the page constitute, one mode of representation. The next is phonocentric. Now we must understand that in the pre-colonial period, or rather in early modern India, so that is also a pre-print era. We didn't have the printing press. There was no mass production of texts. And most people obviously didn't know many, and obviously at that point of time, not many people, they knew how to read. So orality constituted an important vehicle of dissemination. So therefore we have so many songs. The orality here, not oral, but orality was something that was highly emphasized upon as an important vehicle for disseminating ideas about one's own sectarian beliefs and attitudes. So phono, the very word. And also we emphasize upon whether we talk about Kabir, whether we talk about Mirabai, whether we talk about Guru Nanak, when we talk about Guru Bani. The very idea of Bani has a sense of orality associated with it. So that is the phonocentric. And the third concept that is something the widest among these three concepts is the body-centric concept of knowledge. We must understand that, and here we are directly entering the performative domain of knowledge. Let us try to imagine a scene from, maybe during Dashera time, we have Ram Leela happening in North India. At different places, in say in Banaras or in Ramnagar, in Delhi, across Ayodhya, we have Ram Leelas happening. So now the Ram Leela is directly the very Ram Leela is a performance which is primarily based in the Ramcharitmanas. Now Ramcharitmanas is also narrated by different Ramayanis. Even in Banaras, there's a specific community called the Ramayanis. They recite the Ramayana. And there are different ways of narrating the stories from the Ramcharitmanas. There are different tenor, there are different pitches, there are different intonations of reading from the text. It's not just the reading the way we do. There are different, it has to be put to music. And then those very words, those very verses are performed. We they perform, and we have they are and in performance, the most important component is the body, because and when they are recasted into performance, a particular human being takes upon the role of a Krishna or Ram. So the very existence of the individual is deified. He's not just a normal human being. He is somebody who has taken upon himself the aura of a god or a goddess. And his particular body is deified in that particular process. So bhakti here becomes not merely, or rather, the very idea of of a text or Ramkatha is not merely something only textual, but the definition of textuality is extended to the whole concept of my being. A being which is constantly becoming. It's not a being, a very closed state of affair, but a being which is it's continuously becoming and evolving across years, across centuries. That is how performance traditions have developed. If we accept the colonial model, we are actually not giving enough attention to the dynamics of knowledge and its circulation that happened in early modern India. So unless we do that, our understanding of our own cultures will be seriously misdirected. And I would like to end, maybe I have roughly about, say, 5-6 minutes. So I'll just, so I will, I'm just sort of putting these issues forth for a discussion. So I'll end with another element. So I talked about textuality, I talked about orality, I talked about performativity, and the fourth and main element is the element of visuality. What is the role of visual in bhakti? Now let us try to imagine the last time we say we visited a temple or a monastery. Now what do we see, or even a church for that matter? So what do we see in the walls of the church? In the ceilings, what do we see? We see different stories from the lives of Christ in church, or maybe in a hotra we see different instances from the life of Krishna or Vishnu. They are inscribed upon the walls. Right, we see the different. It could be the Sagar Manthan episode. It could be various episodes from the life of Krishna drawn on the walls of a Vishnu temple or a Krishna temple or even a hotra. Now, what is the role of these visual images? I see these visual images primarily as mental texts. Now, what happens now when I see those images? Right, anybody who sees that images, immediately my mind goes back to that particular narrative of and what happens. And now any picture, now these pictures are static pictures, right? For example, if we try to imagine a picture of Krishna doing something, maybe he's sort of taming the Kalia, or he is sort of taming, that whole Govardhan mountain episode. So a picture is something which is static. But when we witness that particular image, our mind doesn't remain static. The narrative starts playing within our mind. Okay, this is how the whole episode played out. We may then started reciting from that particular episode from the Bhagavad Puran. But then, and this comes very spontaneously for a devotee. That comes very spontaneously, right? So that visual text, even though it's frozen, it has its own dynamics. And what I contend that multimediality, and if we take this text, orality, performance, visual, they're different medium. Take any story. The story will be written down. The story can be sung. The story could be performed. The story could be inscribed on the wall, but the narrative remains the same. What changes? The medium changes. So this is what I understand by
multimediality. And what we need to understand, we can actually undertake comparative studies between these different types of medialities that we are talking about here. Because in every transmission, if we look at these medialities as from the perspective of transmission, because the story is constantly in motion, right? The stories are transformed, the visualities are transformed, the dynamics are transformed. The stories are actually moving. We see them in front of their eyes, and they take, and stories by themselves are intangible. We cannot touch the stories, but we can actually touch, the visual, the description of a story. We can touch a picture, we can touch the murals. So it comes to acquire a tactile dimension, which is otherwise not evident when we listen or merely read the stories. So when I'm talking about comparative, it must be evident. It must be evident that I'm not just comparing two different languages or but I'm trying to understand comparative as a highly interliterary process. I'm trying to understand comparative as a very compact and a very intensive process, which will actually help us develop a very nuanced and a holistic knowledge about our own culture. It's not just about comparing, say Macbeth in Bengali or Macbeth in Assamese, or say Macbeth in Uriya or Macbeth in Hindi. It's about trying to understand one text, Macbeth in text, Macbeth in performance, and also our prior knowledge of Macbeth, which constantly gets reinterpreted and redefined as many times as we watch the performances of Macbeth being done on a stage. So this is how I would like to understand the comparative process. And finally, to end, when we talk about the comparative world of Bhakti, we also need to acknowledge the presence of multilinguality, because our present day understanding of language is highly specific to constricted geographical boundaries. And when we talk about, say, Assamese literary culture or Bengali literary culture, we try to assume those languages as fixed categories. But this was not the case in the early modern period, because when those languages are yet to be standardized, right? So there was very widespread traffic between these languages. So when we do comparative literature, generally we assume languages or literatures to be categories of their own, and we are trying to compare. But when we are looking at comparative in the early modern period, we need to be very careful about these assumptions of language or literary cultures as close categories, because multilingualism and they admit a lot of overlappings and interlinkages, which need to be appreciated and understood, for their own right. So Bhakti actually it gives us new perspective. It's not just about, as I said, it's not just about devotional cultures. It's also about how cultures interacted in the pre-colonial period, and understanding Bhakti also gives us a chance, gives us an opportunity, a context towards challenging the colonial episteme. In the present era, we are talking about the idea of decoloniality, right? It's not, from post-colonialism, we are moving towards decolonizing. It's not just about, because post-colonialism basically, tried to beat the colonizers in their own game using their own methodology. In decoloniality, we are using our own methodology, our own understanding of our own cultures. Right. So this is something that I feel should be our future perspective towards literary studies. So possibly I can end here, and I'd love to take you. And these are the ideas which are basically I'm working on these areas. So I don't claim these ideas to be totally finalized or concretized at this moment of time. It's a work in progress. And I would love to have your opinions, your comments, your suggestions to my observations, to my deliberations. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Right.
Thank you so much, sir. It was indeed a wonderful time listening to you. And sir, I personally found it very enriching and an analytic deliberation. And so comparative studies have always been insightful. And I'm sure many participants here have been enlightened from your deliberation. So I would like to just check if there are any questions that our esteemed participants would like to have. Oh yeah, so there is from Dr. A.S. Povamma. What are the 3 principles of Bhakti movement?
Right. So, if by principles possibly you are talking about the 3 modes of representation that I talked about.
Are the cryptocentric?
Yes. See, those are basically, three different textualities, if we might say, because let me try to explain this from the perspective of a text. Now, generally, when we talk about a particular text, we generally refer to, a concrete words on the page. But when we talk about textuality, we are trying to see how the idea of text moves from just from the page to, we talk about from moving from the page to the stage, right? From mute to motion, right? So what happened during Bhakti movement is cryptocentric is basically the words inscribed on a page. That is the first thing. The next is how words, they escape the confines of the page or of the manuscript, and they are articulated. They are spoken out or sung or put to music, right? That is a phone oral dimension of a text, right? There is a second principle. I would not use the word principle here, but there are basically different modes of articulation. And the third is basically performance. And with performance, obviously, our body is associated, because without our body, there could be no performance. Even puppets have to be seen as bodies, right? So that the third is basically body-centric dimension of body-centric mode of representation. Scripto or text in a very traditional sense, oral or phono, or third is performative or body-centric. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And so let me see if there are any more questions to be taken.
And I'm sorry if I sounded a bit theoretical at certain places, because actually, given the amount of time, I didn't have enough scope to give examples.
Sir, we really enjoyed it.
So if you need any kind of clarification, if you want me to sort of go back to some of the concepts that I talked about, I would love to, sort of give a recap. So, but I'm really sorry if I, Sania,
No, sir,
if
we
I sounded
really enlightened by your talk,
theoretical.
and we wish to hear you in future also.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And we are not okay, sir. There is one more question, sir. The question is from Samit Ray. How do you want to explain Bhakti in yogis? How do they manifest Bhakti?
Right. See, Bhakti, when it is conceptualized, as or rather seen from the perspective of a yogi or a rishi, that is a very traditional idea of bhakti. Bhakti is something that generally an ascetic or a sage or a tapasvi or a somebody who's engaged in meditation practices. Now, yogic bhakti has a very altogether different dimension. The bhakti, as I've understood, as I clarified at the outset, I'm looking at bhakti as something which is widespread. Bhakti is not something which is, we use the word spiritual, not merely spiritual, but bhakti as something which is spread over every dimension of life. Right. So yogic bhakti is something which is highly spiritual, highly esoteric, if I can use the term. So, for example, bhakti, for a yogi, bhakti is something which is physical as well as spiritual, because where they the primary objective of bhakti is the union of the body, mind, and soul, and that takes a period. That may take a long period of time. But the bhakti, as I've understood, and that actually happened during the bhakti movement, was taking its message to the people, kind of a democratization of the very highly esoteric spirit of bhakti. This is something that I'm emphasizing on. And here I would like to use a term called charya. Now, what is charya? We talk about charya padas, we talk about charya, but charya is basically how bhakti came to be associated with the daily conduct of life. And this is what I meant when I talked about the radical cultural sensibility of bhakti. It changed, and it changed not only the way I see the main the main revolutionary impetus of bhakti drew from the fact that it simplified the way we looked at our gods and goddesses, right? So it actually led to an unmediated relationship between the gods and the devotees, right? And now this unmediated direct contact actually bypassed a lots of rituals and austere practices which were prioritized in the earlier modes of worship, right? The bhakti, as I see, is something which actually was very inclusive rather than being very specialized. Bhakti, which was something that actually appealed to, and this is how what Novetske understands by the term quotidian, it appealed to the lay sensibility, not the sensibility of the Brahmin or sensibility of the yogi. It appeals to the sensibility of the common people. And this was the triumph of bhakti, right? So this is how I tried to understand bhakti. And I see there are a few more questions. Yeah, so Kirti Tiwari has a question. Don't you think Bhakti Marga ultimately leads to Gyan? See, yes, but that's one of the margas. When we talk about Gyan, we talk about, see, Gyan is but just one dimension of the larger objective of Bhakti. Right? Jnana, karma, moksha, there are different ways to understand Bhakti. Right. So yes, bhakti leads to gyan. There's no gainsaying the fact that bhakti doesn't. But this, we need to understand what exactly is this gyan, right? And what exactly is this bhakti marg? This is something that was emphasized. What exactly is bhakti? How to do bhakti? The bhakti marg is it's just about going to the temple. Bhakti marg is not just about one unilateral devotion to God. There are 9 different modes of bhakti. You can look at bhakti. You can there are Navavida bhakti, kirtan, shravan, smaran, dasya, sakha, madhur, vatsalya. The different modes of bhakti. Now, what are these? Madhur, vatsalya. These are dynamics of human relationships. I look at Krishna as a child. I look at Krishna as my friend. I look at Krishna as my master. I look at Krishna. I see myself as a slave to Krishna. So these are dynamics of personal relationships. So what I'm trying to do, and by these different modes of experiencing bhakti, I am attaining knowledge. Right. So bhakti, and there are different and there are different facets of bhakti, and it varied from, say, literature to literature. For example, the Shankari Vaishnavism, the neo Vaishnavite movement in Assam. Within Assam, there is no Madhur Bhav. There is no Madhur Rasa. So we don't have Radha in Shankari Vaishnavism, but Radha plays a very prominent role in Chaitanya, in Gauriya Vaishnavism, and even in Manipur. Right, Radha plays a very central role. So it differs for, and this is something that we need, and this is something that Bhakti did. So here, when we talk about Bhakti, we should not only talk about the Sanskrit sources, but we also need to understand how different regional cultures across the country, how they responded to the cosmopolitan, or rather the larger ethos of Bhakti to which they responded. So this is something that we need to do when we are looking into our own languages and literatures. We are not just passive recipients. We actively reworked Bhakti to suit our own, cultural objectives, social, cultural, ideological objectives. Right?
So generally, generally it is believed that Gyan Marg is more difficult and Bhakti is easier. Is it so?
See, then what exactly is Gyan Marg? We need to know what exactly is Gyan Marg. So if by Gyan Marg you are referring to austere practices, are you referring to the very idea of siddhi? Are you referring to how should I put it? Bhakti as something which is highly ritualistic. So so it depends how we look at Gyan Marg here. Now, for Kabir, for example, Kabir's mode of Bhakti, he did away with all the rituals. He even, dismissed the very idea of, of religiosity. He looked at a supreme Lord. Right. So the ways of approaching God's, the respective, the personal idea, and so with Bhakti, the idea of a personal God was developed. If you look at Mirabai, for example. Now, for Mirabai, her approach to Krishna was very intimate, something that bypassed her personal relationships. Right. So, there are different ways of experiencing this jnana. So it varies from culture to culture, that what is jnana, what is the purpose of devotion, what is the purpose of worship, that differs from culture to culture. We cannot give an universal statement, in this connection. We cannot give a universal statement. We have to be highly, discerning, discriminating in our approach to Bhakti. And this is where the importance of comparative research comes in.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Right.
So can I?
Yes,
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
So somewhere I read Bhakti movement began in the Tamil region around the 6th and the 7th century AD and achieved a great deal of popularity through the poems of Alvars and Nayanas, the Vaishnavite and Shaivite poets. Could you please elaborate on the poems? If you have, I have no idea.
Yes, so Bhakti usually began, around the same time, 7th, 8th century. And in Tamil Nadu, there were basically two classes or two sects of devotees, the Vaishnavites, who were referred to as who are the devotees of Vishnu, the Alvars, and then there are devotees of Shiva, right? And there were like a host of poets, and there are even the Alvar poets even had a woman poet called Andal. Right? And they call Andal. So they were the ones who, so Bhakti actually began in the south. Bhakti actually began in Tamil Nadu. And then it moved towards, so in the outset of my lecture, I'm saying that, we almost have 1,000 years of Bhakti in India. If we take its beginning in the south and coming up to the north, and then with Kabir and subsequently, it has its impact very strong, going very strong till about the 18th century. Right?
Yeah. Even Sikh Guru also, Guru Nanak.
Absolutely. And there was and there was active dialogue amongst these cultures. There was very strong and dynamic intercultural dialogues that happened among these different cultures. Right.
Yeah, that's true. And the Bhakti movement was first, it seems, organized by Ramanuja from the 7th century. And the Bhakti movement was started in South India as the
Ramanuja was somebody who brought Bhakti to the north.
And this Bhakti movement opened two ways to feel God. One was Nirgun and the other was the
Yes,
Sagun.
Saguna, yes.
Yeah.
Saguna, I mean, I didn't go into because, talking just about Bhakti would constitute one separate. Saguna and Nirguna are basically two ways of approaching your personal God, right?
Yeah.
Saguna is something, God with attributes, and Nirguna is something God without attributes.
Yeah.
Now, for example, Kabir was a Nirguna poet. For example, for Kabir, God had no structure. He refused to accept any particular image of God, right?
Yeah.
So for them, God was Nirgun Nirakar, a formless absolute. God was formless absolute, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in Saguna, there is a
Mm.
particular manifestation of Godhead. For example,
God.
Meera worshipped the idol of Krishna. She actually married, she married herself to Krishna. So Meera's devotion is Saguna devotion. So if you look at different cultures of bhakti within India, we'll find that some cultures are Saguna and Nirguna, and there are obviously clashes and disagreements between these different schools, and also different scholars across the period. They have tried to posit their their chosen saint as a Saguna, or for example Kabir. Kabir has been variously defined and redefined as a Saguna or a Nirguna. Different scholars have different opinions regarding what exactly was the philosophical orientation of these saints and philosophers, right? So this provides for an excellent study. It is something, this is so fascinating if one actually goes into the way how the hagiographies of these saints were created, how they evolved over a period of time.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So Saguna and Nirguna are, two of the basic tenets, the components of bhakti, right?
Yes, sir. And it's been such an intriguing topic, sir, that the questions are coming on.
Right. So there are two more questions. So
Yes.
this is a question by I think SI.
Yes.
Yeah. So what is bhakti for common people, and how it differs from bhakti of the sages and saints? I guess I already I more or less answered that particular thing, that see, for sages and saints, bhakti is something which is a very esoteric ritualistic activity, right? So this is bhakti as understood in a very traditional way. Bhakti for common people is something that is associated with the charyas. Charya means how you conduct your day-to-day, how you integrate bhakti with your day-to-day activities. Through music, dance, theater, or how bhakti becomes a part of your aesthetic life. There's a because how you aestheticize bhakti. Right. For example, we go to watch a Ramlila for it, right? The Ramlila, going to watch a Ramlila, performing in a Ramlila, right, is also a way of showing your bhakti to Ram. Or reading from the Ram, every Sunday or maybe every day, you may read one page of Ramcharitmanas. There are, I had a friend who came from a family of blacksmiths, right? He says that when his father used to work on his in his warehouse, he used to recite the Ramcharitmanas. So he came from a very supposedly socially kind of a poor family, but then his father knew the Ramcharitmanas by heart.
Yeah.
Right. So this was something that bhakti was integrated with the day-to-day practice of one's life. It's not just about being secluded from society. It's something that is part and parcel of our social life. This is how I try to understand bhakti. Right. So the next question.
Sir, it is said that Mirabai was one of the most significant poet saints of the Bhakti movement. Can you elaborate on that, sir?
Yes, absolutely. And there are very strong women poets. Even if you look at the South, Mirabai, obviously, yes, Mirabai and her songs have been very popular, as popular bhajans, Mere to Gitar Gopal, Dusuro na koi, Payo Jitene, Ram Ratan Dhan Payo. This her bhajans have become very popular, right? And she has been her life has been variously interpreted by different scholars across history, right? And for her, worshipping of Krishna was something which was not merely devotional, but also something that helped her assert her own identity in a very highly patriarchal family. So for her, bhakti was not just a means of devotion, but bhakti was also a means of liberation for her.
Yeah.
Right. In
Yeah.
actively fighting against, the oppression to which she was subjected.
Yeah.
So here
So,
we also come into the very idea of how bhakti also has to do with the reversing gender roles, because
yeah.
what happens in the case of bhakti, generally the devotee imagines, if it's a male, he would imagine himself as a female vis-a-vis God, right?
Yeah.
Now for
Yeah.
Meera, this was something which was real. The struggle
Yeah.
was actually, it was real for her. It was not a
Yeah.
struggle that was imagined, but for her it was a real struggle.
Yeah.
And that had
So
obvious
could you please suggest
implications.
a wonderful book to know more about Mirabai?
Meera,
Some good book?
absolutely. There is a recent book which has come. This is actually a Hindi book. It has been translated by
Yeah.
a professor of Hindi called, the book is called Meera versus Meera.
Okay.
Meera versus Meera, Meera vs Meera, and it's
Okay.
available in Amazon, and it's written by a professor called Professor Madhav Hada.
Professor Madhav.
Hada, Hada.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Right, it's a very recent book, and here Professor Hada has actually, has debunked, has actually, sort of questioned many traditional assumptions associated with, with Mirabai. And if you're interested to know about Kabir, just in case, there's a very good book called Kabir by Purushottam Agarwal. So,
okay.
right,
Kabir,
so
Kabir.
Kabir.
Okay.
So it's a very recent books, 2021-22, very recent books. And
Okay.
there's also a book on Surdas by Professor John Stratton Hawley. He has been
Okay.
working on Surdas for a very long time. So he has also, so you might like to refer to these books.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And so we have just 2 more questions to take,
Yes.
sir. We'll proceed further after that.
Right. Who are perfect? Those who worship the formless Brahman, and those who. There's no question of perfection here, because it all depends on how. Because bhakti, as a movement, it actually debunks the notion of perfect. There's no perfect bhakta. Is something and this is something where bhakti democratizes religion. Right. It emphasizes on collective devotion to God, not just personal devotion, collective devotion to God. So the question of perfection doesn't come here. Even a saguna, nirguna, both are equal before the eyes of God. So, and it depends on our own dynamics. Obviously, there are people who would argue one against the another. That depends on different ideological perspectives, but the question of perfection doesn't arise here. Right?
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for attending to all the questions that has come up. I don't see any more questions.
There are 2 more questions. Let me just quickly did bhakti poetry eradicate untouchability? Yes, obviously, untouchability. There's a poet called Raidas. There are 2 poets in Karnataka called Kanakadasa. There's a very interesting story of Udupi Krishna temple, maybe on some other occasion. Yeah, I can tell you that story. Bhakti, absolutely, it helped eradicate untouchability. That's why bhakti was so revolutionary in the early modern period of Indian history. It actually gave people from lower classes of the society, it enabled them to worship and also, enter into temples. Right, there are many stories associated with it. Maybe some other day, I can talk about that. But yes, there are stories. It actually helped to eradicate untouchability. Yeah. Can we read it? Bachana movement was with the Western. Yes, we can. But transcendentalism has a different. Yeah, we can obviously undertake comparative studies, but bhakti, I believe, has a wider dimension, because bhakti is not only transcending. It's not just about transcendentalism, but it is also dealing with here and now. It's not about showing you, it's not about showing you the promise of Vaikuntha or Kailas, but it's also about dealing with your own present day problems of here and now. Yes, we can compare, but obviously, there are, Bhakti has a wider dimension.
Is it, sir, to worship God, that man should serve humanity? That's one of the ways of worshiping God.
Basic tenet of Bhakti. Yes, yes.
And all men are equal in that sense.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Why men? Why men? Every living being.
Yeah, men is inclusive of all that. Yeah.
Every living being. There's, har kan mein base Ram, as they said, every element has in it the soul of Ram. So, it's not just about the human being. Every living being has in it, the presence of God. Right?
Yeah.
That's
and God is one. And
Sorry?
God is one.
Huh?
God is one. Yeah, that concept. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And from here, we would like to move on to introducing Dr. Prashanta Chakraborty, sir. I take the pleasure to do so. Sir, Dr. Prashanta Chakraborty, sir, is the Vice President, Academy iSPELL India. Dr. Chakraborty served for more than 3 decades in government colleges of Tripura. He pursued his PhD on Australian literature in 2002. He was a visiting professor at BBM College, Agartala, ICFA University, and Rajeshri College of Skills and Education, respectively. At present, he is the visiting professor in Holy Cross College, West Tripura. He is actively engaged in research and publication. His area of interest covers Indian English literature and linguistics. He presented papers in a number of national and international seminars. He has given keynote addresses and chaired a couple of plenary sessions. He was a member of peer review teams for some national journals. He published 32 papers in national and international journals and edited and co-edited book chapters and textbooks for the students of Tripura University. At present, he is working on a project on partition literature of Eastern India. With pleasure, I would like to invite Dr. Prashanta Chakraborty, sir, to kindly chair the session.
Hello, sir.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, our General Secretary and EC members, and also the event coordinator for giving me the chance to chair this session. I was really overwhelmed by the speech of Dr. Dhurjjati Sarma, sir.
Right.
I was really, I was interested in this Bhakti movement also, and the way he analyzed the whole thing. I was really very much happy because I learned a lot from the discussion that he made. Actually, what I personally felt that Bhakti movement was no doubt a cultural movement and also a revolutionary movement. And if we look at this movement, it started no doubt from Tamil Nadu, and when it came to North India, I should refer another important personality, and his name is Chaitanya Dev. And we have seen that how Chaitanya Dev have broke the barrier, and he wanted to take all the people to Jagannath temple. And see, when we go for some researches, we can understand that he was murdered in within this Jagannath temple, and after that something like he was vanished, like this sort of propaganda was made. So this is a Bhakti movement, is a revolutionary, and then as Dr. Sarma has told, that it is a progressive movement before colonialization has came. And Dr. Sarma has also referred to some literary theories, and then he has also shown how different stages of Bhakti movement were there, and how this scriptocentricity and then phonocentricity then body centric and visuality. All these things he has very clearly explained, and we have also seen through interaction we have come to know more about what actually the Bhakti movement had done in respect of literary literary studies also. So in this way we have really enjoyed the talk, and I am very much thankful to Dr. Sarma for a beautiful presentation, and I think that we shall have him again in this platform so that we can know more about this this Bhakti movement and how it affected the literary arena. And the another thing, what he pointed out, actually, I also felt the same thing, that there are different types of Ramayana. Although the form, the basic structure is same, but there are so many things that have so many stories have added in different parts of the Ramayana. As for example, when we see this one, Ganesha, the Ganesha has a different, different structure in uh, Maharashtra, whereas in Bengal it has a different identity. So these sort of things are there, and interpretation of Sita also. Sita, who is Sita? Is it somebody has a belief that she is a, she is a daughter of Ravana also. So there are different interpretation and there are different stories related to, although the structure is the same, but the stories are different. So I am very much happy to see that Dr. Sarma has referred to all these things, and I am very much happy that I have been, enriched by his talk. So thank you very much, and I really want to see that Dr. Sharma will be there again in this platform, and we will be enriched again by his deliberation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I'm really grateful for your kind words. And
Yes,
thank
sir.
you, sir. Yeah, and it was a matter of pleasure for me as well to be present here and to have been able to share my thoughts and observations. So as I
Yes.
say, these are my areas I'm presently working on. So, and thank you for your comments and suggestions. They have surely enriched the way I shall be looking at these areas in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you so much for your very humble review, and your approach to the whole deliberation was extremely valuable, sir. And as we have seen that today's session was very intriguing, and many participants were, they were evoked to take up to feed their curiosity, and that it deserves. And with this, we are almost coming to the end of today's session. And may I invite Madam Dr. Shalini Yadav, ma'am, to kindly share the certificates.
Thank you, Sumitra.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
It was really very informative session, and I feel that all the questions are also answered well of Kirti ma'am and Povama ma'am. Pramod sir, will you share the certificates, please? I take this privilege and honor in bestowing this certificate upon the keynote speaker of today, Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma has deliberated in such a, you can say, meticulous way today, and we all are enlightened about the topic. And I feel that there's much to talk about this, and we can in future also have such talks. Dr. Sharma, please take this token of appreciation from iSPELL side.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really great, and this is something it's my pleasure that I have been able to share my thoughts. So thank you so
No,
much
it's
for sharing.
it's a privilege of iSPELL India to have you here today with us.
Yeah. So thank you for
Thanks a
giving
lot,
me this
sir.
space. Thank you, and thank you for the certificate. Thank you so much. It's looking very it's gorgeous. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
This certificate goes to Dr. Prashanta Chakravarti, sir. And I'm no one to give you a certificate, but still, sir, on behalf of iSPELL India, please accept the certificate as a token of appreciation.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sangmitra ma'am, you have really done a very good job. You can say proceeding the whole event in such a glorious way. So the
Thank you.
certificate goes to Sangmitra ma'am. Please take it, accept it from our side.
Sure, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, am I audible? Yes.
Yeah, you're audible, Sangmitra.
And
Next
thank you,
certificate goes
Shweta.
to
Yes, sir.
Shweta. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see?
Yeah,
Yeah,
looking gorgeous.
you are visible and audible.
Yes.
And
Visible and
I'm
audible
really
very much.
thankful to Shweta also that she has presented beautiful, speakers throughout the month of November. I'm really thankful from the executive body also. I and Shalini madam, both of us, thank you very much for presenting such great scholars like Dhurjjati Sarma sir, then the Assam University Professor Shiv Shankar sir. Okay, so it's really a great pleasure for us.
Sir, it was my learning experience, and I am really thankful to iSPELL for giving me this opportunity to be the event coordinator for this month. And I really think that the speakers that I invited, they accepted, and they came to the platform, and from them we are enlightened.
So the certificate goes to Shweta, so ma'am, and I really feel that this is really a Herculean task to organize all the Sunday events, and you have done. You have made it a grand success, organizing it so well and bringing so many, you can say, good scholars here as chairpersons, keynote speakers, and even wisely chosen master of ceremonies. So you have sailed the boat in a very good way, and the certificate goes to you.
Thank you so
As
much, ma'am.
the event coordinator of the month. May you get more success in future.
Thank you so much.
Here we are coming to near end of the session of today's evening. And I am yet again privileged to extend a hearty vote of thanks on behalf of the entire team of iSPELL India. Our first sincere gratitude goes to our honorable speaker of today's evening, Dr. Dhurjjati Sharma, for gracing the event with an enlightening deliberation. Thank you so much, sir. We would like to hear and have more such illuminating and insightful deliberation from you in days to come. We are definitely looking forward to that, sir. Thank you so much for being here, and you have been here with us, and sparing your valuable time and sharing it with us. It was wonderful. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. And now I'd like to extend our deep sense of appreciation for the chairperson of today's evening, Dr. Prashanta Chakravarti, sir, for a wonderful review. Having touched the core of the session was more alive. Thank you so much, sir. I offer my sincere respect and gratitude to Professor Ghanshyam, sir, Founder and General Secretary, iSPELL India, for encouraging and smoothly functioning the SSC events and supporting relentlessly. And my thanks also goes to Sir Pramod Dhengle, IT Coordinator, iSPELL, Dr. Shalini Yadav, ma'am, and Madam Shweta Sur, the coordinator of today's event, for kind cooperation and coordination. Take this opportunity to thank all the participation for being with us here today and quenching their thirst with the curiosity that has evoked as part of the session. The session was very intriguing. The session was very wonderful. Thank you so much. Last but not the least, I sincerely thank iSPELL India and iSPELL Assam for believing in me. Thank you so much.
As a listener and a participant, I appreciate the Shraddha and Bhakti of the iSPELL platform and also all the team members. And I appreciate the Shraddha and Bhakti of the keynote speaker today, Dr. Sharma. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Shweta, ma'am.
Ma'am, it's a wrap today.
Yes, it's a wrap today. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for a wonderful evening, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.